Hekmat Abukhater is a Syrian-American contributor to The Grey Zone and Mint Press, two of the best media houses anywhere in the world. He's also the host of Conversations with Dissidents, and Hekmat joins me now from the United States. Hekmat, welcome to the show. I just struck me there, Conversations with Dissidents. I suppose that's what we now are, isn't it? We have become dissidents. Now, dissidents used to be a magical word in the West. We loved dissidents when they were dissidents on the other side. Soon we'll be having to put out Samizdats literature and live in the forests, but that's just an observation. But you look like wholehearted and full of integrity dissident to me. Thanks for coming on the show. I wanted to ask you first about this Hannibal directive admission by Haaretz. We knew all this, said all this all along, and yet it has become breaking news, but only if you're in Israel, only if you're an English reader in Israel. Nobody in the West has picked it up. Have you even heard about it in the United States?
Not at all from the mainstream media, and thank you for having me, George. I think at this point in time, being in the United States and the United Kingdom, being a dissident is one of the most honorable places that we can hold. Speaking of the Hannibal directive, absolutely not. The mainstream media has not uttered a word about it. One of my colleagues, Wyatt Reed, just posted on his own Twitter account a publication of any mention of mainstream media from AP News to NYT about Hannibal directive, zero. And additional to the coverage, no apologies are forthcoming. No apologies from Haaretz, Kenneth Roth, the former head of the Human Rights Watch, who libeled and slandered my editor-in-chief, Max Blumenthal, when he initially broke the news along with Electronic Intifada and other news sites. So no apologies forthcoming, no admissions of fault are forthcoming, especially from Haaretz, who are the supposed liberal voices within Israeli society. That is a crisis that we're living in, is that these people hold this faux position within our Western civilized world, unfortunately.
I mean, the situation in your ancestral part of the world seems to be shifting. The plates are distinctly moving. The list of people who said Assad must go is a very long list. Most of them are no longer in office. But one who is in office and who not only said Assad must go, did everything he could to make sure Assad would go, namely President Erdogan of Turkey, he now wants to invite Assad to Turkey for a state visit and is ready to kiss and make up. That's pretty big news, isn't it?
Huge news, George, and you hit it on the nail. There's no country/regime that has been more critical in the proxy war that happened in my country, Syria, than Turkey and the regime of Erdogan. Erdogan, from the very beginning, was making such grand statements, announcing that sooner than later he'll be in the Umayyad mosque to come and read the Fatiha in the mosque to celebrate the liberation of Syria from the crooked Bashar al-Assad regime. And now look at how the tables have turned. The number one mover of the proxy war, the leader of the government that opened the doors to the quote unquote jihadi highway and allowed anyone who wanted to come and become a martyr for their crooked understanding of Islam to do so on Syrian grounds, fighting Shias, fighting moderate Sunnis, fighting Christians, fighting Yazidis, and just genociding the minorities in Syria. That person is now changing his tune. And one of the reasons he's changing his tune harkens back to Israel. Israel is, if you may, it's the petulant child of the United States in the Middle East that requires the United States entirety of its attention, entirety of its diplomatic support, entirety of its military engagements. So the mere fact in Washington within the State Department is that they have little to no time to pay attention to the current status quo in Syria, in the northeast specifically, the Kurdish area, and that status quo where the United States has about 1,000 military personnel safekeeping the Rojava region of northeast Syria that is Kurdish controlled. That status quo is ultimately unacceptable for Erdogan for two reasons. As long as the status quo maintains, the 4 million refugees living within Turkey, the Syrian refugees living within Turkey, cannot return back home to Syria. And the second thing is that you are initially, with maintaining the status quo, you are allowing for a credible autonomous zone in northeast Syria that could one day become a Kurdish autonomous zone. That is something that is entirely unacceptable to the Turkish project, the Neo-Ottoman project that is ultimately racist against Kurds, against any other minority that is not Sunni Turkish.
You mentioned that 4 million. Some of them have been being attacked in Turkey recently, rising bad feeling against them. 4 million is a very large number of refugees to have in your country, any country. Is that one of the issues? And will those 4 million go back to Syria, or will they be on rubber boats heading for England sometime soon?
That is exactly the point, George. So we have 3.6 to 4 million, estimates vary on the number of Syrians in Turkey. And these Syrians who have lived in Turkey, I pity them every day as a Syrian myself because of the treatment that they received from the Turkish government. The Turkish government fundraised to the tunes of billions of dollars off of their name. They received upwards of $10 billion from the European Union, almost $500 million from the United States to quote unquote take care of these Syrian refugees, when in fact, when you ask any of my friends who live in Turkey who had to escape the wars and go to Turkey, they're living on dirt cheap wages because they're cheap labor and they're always under the threat of being deported and exiled from the one country that is currently holding them. So cheap labor that is also now being played with politically. And to your point, I completely agree with you the way you framed this question, George. There are two decisions that capitals like Washington, Paris, and London need to come to terms with. We have an escalating, fast developing situation in Turkey. Turkey is about to normalize. One of the reasons they want to normalize with Syria is to get rid of these 4 million Syrian refugees. Now, we have an option. The State Department in Washington has an option. The Pentagon has an option. Should they go back to an economically empowered Syria that has the boot of economic sanctions lifted off its neck so that these people, when they return, they have jobs, they have something to do, they have maybe a reconstruction project that they can participate in? Or should they get on dinghies, as you just mentioned, get on rubber boats, make their way to Greece, make their way to Germany, make their way to Paris, to France, and make their way ultimately to the United Kingdom and push for more radicalization from the far right in Europe? We saw the election in France. We saw the elections around the European Union. It should be a warning sign. It should be a warning sign that the integration of the refugees is not taking place, and the policies that are sending these waves of immigrants are the main root of this problem. And I'll tell you right now, if there is no economic sanctions easing on Syria, if there's no policy, for example, one of the main policies here is the United States has a military base outside of the northeast, outside of the Kurdish region. That military base is spot on the one highway that connects Iraq and Syria. It's called Al-Tanf base, and it's on the one highway that connects the two regional partners who have been partners in trade for the last hundreds of years between the Iraqi people and the Syrian people. Under all the names that they've ever existed, they've always traded together. But they can't do that because there's a US base that's blocking the path, quite literally blocking the path between those two nations. So one of the ways here, one of the solutions to avoid further radicalization in Europe is remove these barriers on Syria's economy, remove these obstacles for the Syrian people to finally flip the page, start rebuilding their countries, and maybe even welcome these people that have left the country, welcome them back to promising jobs, to a promising life.
I'm presuming, perhaps it's obvious, that President Assad will accept Erdogan's invitation to visit Turkey and to hug and make up. Although he'd be kind of entitled to say, excuse me, after all you did to us, after all you said about me, has President Assad responded yet?
No, actually, George, he actually rejected. He rejected the proposal to meet in Turkey. He doesn't want to go to Istanbul or Adana and give credibility to this invitation. He accepted to meet elsewhere. He accepted to potentially meet in Iraq or meet in Russia. But to your point, I completely agree. If the Syrian government came to the conclusion that Turkey has been the ultimate tumor on the Syrian people for the last 12 years, 13 years. Turkey, again, I recommend anyone watching this to go on YouTube and watch Lindsay Snell's documentary on how Turkey helped ISIS while NATO watched. It's a short documentary on her new channel. Things Aren't Great. I really recommend it, especially in these weeks as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of NATO. NATO, which Turkey is the second army within NATO after the United States. Turkey has been, again, opened the borders. There was a clear path. People will fly from Dagestan, from Tunisia, from the United Kingdom. They'd fly to Ataturk International Airport. They drive over to one of the cities in the north, in the border between Syria and Turkey, like Orfa. And then they'd simply go down with all the equipment that they need, with all the coordinates that they need, and they would be on their way. Good luck, young buck. Go ahead and fight and spread the thought of Daesh and ISIS as long as you can. So I would definitely understand that sentiment, and I think every single true Syrian feels that sentiment. This disgust that we're now going to have to deal with Erdogan, not another government, not the Turkish people, with Erdogan specifically, but that is something that I think ultimately is for the benefit of Syria to move on, to reestablish diplomatic trade routes, and to start rebuilding again. That's the main thing that the Syrian people need to focus on now.
Hekmat Abukhater, excellent. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure the audience enjoyed listening. Thanks for joining us.